So I've been hearing the same complaint over and over again about the combat UI for Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Now personally, I really like the UI with the orange tint and how things are being displayed this time around, but there are a couple of minor things that I do think should be tweaked. Now for anyone who doesn't know, I studied games design for 2 years at college, and taking what I learnt from there, I can tell you that all the issues I'm about to talk about are not big and complicated things to fix. In fact, most of the issues that I have with the UI may have already been fixed. And so with all that out of the way, let's talk about the first issue I have with the screen, which is screen clutter. Now this particular image is where most of my concerns originate from. Put simply, chaos is occurring on screen. There is so much information going on at once that it's a lot to take in when it's paused, not even when the game is playing. I think this is bound to be an issue though, considering the fact that we now have 7 party members active at once. That's more than double the characters we're used to attacking, taking damage, applying debuffs, and more, all at the same time, so a little bit of chaos does come with the territory. Monolith have also clearly tried very hard to make this as condensed and clear as possible though. As I mentioned in my combat video, every colour of text has a certain meaning to differentiate our attacks and damage from everybody else's, and this really helps with us picking out the info we want at any particular moment. Unfortunately, however, for whatever reason, they have not continued this trend for all the text that appears, as attacks that have missed, were resisted, or applied a debuff all appear in the same text colour as the player's damage, regardless if it was our own attack or the AI's. I imagine at some point this could become very confusing, and I don't think it would take very long for you to mistake some of that text for your own attack, when in reality it is referring to an ally's attack. The only possible way to even verify if it was your attack or not would be to look elsewhere on the screen for other prompts, which being cluttered in the first place isn't going to be easy. But the thing that I believe is making the UI seem cluttered the most is all of the repeated information. For example, the field skill prompt shows up in 3 different locations around the screen. What's worse is that only one of these even describes what the effect is in the first place. Both this attack up buff and this evasion buff use the same icon, meaning that without the text showing what each buff actually is, we would have no idea what the effect is. Field skills also are not the only offender. Arts have these little icons displaying what their effects are, which is kinda pointless when the text to the side of the art quite literally gives the exact same info. Another example is the heat meter when you're in your Ouroboros form. The heat meter is shown twice in 2 different ways, being the character portraits bar and the interlink symbol. Now I understand that we need some way to measure how much the ability has cooled down before we reuse it again, but I simply do not see the point of it being displayed twice. There are even more examples of this happening all over the place as well, and every time it's adding a little bit more onto the screen for us to look out for. Funnily enough, we haven't even touched on the majority of the UI on screen yet. The game's UI was obviously inspired more so from Xenoblade 2 compared to Xenoblade 1 Definitive Edition, but there has been some changes since then. The biggest difference that you may notice is that the art palettes are more towards the center of the screen compared to how they were up to the edges in 2. This is the biggest offender, which makes the screen feel cluttered as we lose the majority of the center, with the compromise being that we can see more off to both of the bottom corners. I understand that this was done for the fusion art system so that they could show this line connecting them together, but the result is that we've lost a massive amount of the screen which we used to have access to. What I've done to highlight this is go into Photoshop and highlight how much of the screen is now lost to the HUD. All of the red area are locations where the HUD appears, and all the green area is free space where we can see. Now I understand that a lot of the HUD elements are partially transparent, but as you can see, there isn't much in the way of center space, which is the main thing that we want. And comparing this to Xenoblade 2 really highlights how little space there is compared to before. A lot of the space in the center is visible in Xenoblade 2, and all the important info is strategically placed around the sides, but the HUD for Xenoblade Xenoblade 3 takes up a lot of this space. But as I mentioned at the beginning, these are easy things to fix. To fix the issue with the text, the only thing that would need to be changed is the colour of words like missed and resisted when performed by an ally or enemy. Admittedly, I don't think many of us care whether or not our ally missed an attack or not, and so giving it this subtle blue colour would be just fine to showcase that it did happen whilst also not confusing it for our own attack. Debuffs are in the same category, as the symbol at the side of the text is what you should really be looking out for anyway. So when an ally applies one of those effects, this symbol alone should be sufficient in showing that it was applied, especially when it shows up in 2 locations. Field skill should also be an easy fix, and they may already be in the process of doing what I'm about to suggest. I think giving each field skill its own icon would work perfectly well on its own to show us what the effect is. This way, we should be able to easily recognize which buff has been placed and what different buffs are active on us at any one time, even through a chaotic fight. Another way to make them stand out on screen though could be by giving each effect their own colour. For instance, this attack up buff actually has an orange area of effect, as can be seen in a couple of shots. So making this unique symbol the same colour as the area of effect ring could help us with identifying what type of field skill has been applied and what its effect is. Monolith may already be doing this though, as this effect seems to follow all the rules I just set out. Its symbol is unique and matches its area of effect ring, which makes it pretty clear what it is, if you can read Japanese that is. In terms of the permanent UI on screen, I have a couple of suggestions. To clear more space in the middle of the screen, I would suggest moving the art's UI further to the right, and change it to include fusion arts there instead, which should free up a massive amount of the screen. Some of you may be worried that this could be a lot of work to do, but the reality is that Monolith have already done it. The chain attack UI is near perfect for the art, and if we use that instead, we would still have all of the relevant info, with the only thing missing being how much these arts are charged up. This would of course mean that all the UI on the left is no longer needed, except for the interlink level and prompt. Instead of this button repeating the heat level, however, I would like to see this measure how close we are to our interlink leveling up. Now I accept that we don't truly understand how interlinking and its level system works yet, and if we can even measure it, but this way we wouldn't have as much repeat info, and would actually even have even more on screen, whilst taking up less space. The Tactics and Fusions menu could then go on the bottom of the screen instead, while still serving the same purpose as before. And with all that done, the only thing left to discuss is the party gauge meter. What in the actual hell is it doing there? This is the one thing I hate about the UI. It feels so out of place, just being this random square off to the side. And why does it fill up as a circle? What was wrong with it filling up as a bar? One thing I forgot to mention in my combat video is that this was always used for reviving teammates, and you would use a full section of it to do so, but that doesn't look like it's the case here, so my big fear of the healer class being the only one that can revive allies might be true. Anyways, I just want to see this as a bar once again. You can keep it where it is and it can just fill up the side of the screen, but just change it. God, I hate it. And so that pretty much sums up the changes that I would make to the UI. Once again, I do actually like the UI as it is now, excluding the chain attack meter, but I wouldn't be opposed to seeing a couple of these tweaks by the time the game comes out in July. What are your thoughts on the UI? Let me know in the comments along with what tweaks you'd make. But with that out of the way, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, consider hitting that subscribe button, as I'm going to be bringing you all even more Xenoblade Chronicles 3 content soon. I appreciate you all for watching though, and hope to see you in the next one. Peace guys.